Class B drug. People found guilty of possessing a Class B drug could go to jail for up to 5 years and be fined. Class B drug. Class C drug. It is illegal to have, give away or deal in Class C drugs. Class C drug. Fraudulent conveyance. Civil cases of fraudulent conveyance can be tried in a court of law. Fraudulent conveyance. Fraudulent preference. Liabilities attached to fraudulent preferences will be reviewed following an examination of Article 304. Fraudulent preference. Fraudulent trading. Fraudulent trading may constitute a criminal offense. Fraudulent trading. Fraudulent transaction. These 5 directives for verifying orders, if followed, will greatly reduce the risk of fraudulent transactions. Fraudulent transaction. Freedom of assembly. You have freedom of assembly and obviously freedom of speech. Freedom of assembly. Freedom of association. In Italy, the freedom of association is established in Article 18 of the Constitution. Freedom of association. Freedom of information. The Freedom of Information Act was enacted in 1966. Freedom of information. Freedom of movement. Freedom of movement is one of the founding principles of the EU. Freedom of movement. Freedom of speech. Where does freedom of speech come from? Freedom of speech. Freedom of the press. The U.S. Constitution guarantees freedom of the press. Freedom of the press. Freedom of thought. You know, there are 2 good things in life, freedom of thought and freedom of action. Freedom of thought. Freedom of conscience and religion. Everyone shall have the right to freedom of conscience and religion. Freedom of conscience and religion. Identity document. An identity document is important to get as soon as you are eligible as it proves your identity. Identity document. Identity papers. May I check your identity papers? Identity papers. Identity parade. The husband of murdered honeymoon bride Annie Diwani will return to South Africa in days for an identity parade. Identity parade. Identity theft. Identity theft is a growing and serious problem, which can lead to credit card fraud. Identity theft. False identity. She hides behind a false identity. False identity. To change your identity. Did you change your identity? To change your identity. To be asked for proof of identity. Mary was asked for proof of identity. To be asked for proof of identity. A case of mistaken identity. His attack was a case of mistaken identity. A case of mistaken identity. Implied contract. An implied contract is created when 2 or more parties have no written contract. Implied contract. Implied malice. There are 2 kinds of malice aforethought, express malice and implied malice. Implied malice. Fraudulent misrepresentation.